Mammography is one of the best screening tools to find breast cancer.
Breast cancer may not be preventable, but you can survive it through early detection.
If you're a mother or grandmother,
Sister or best friend,
aunt or cousin,
We encourage you to know your risk, make healthy lifestyle choices, and to know what's normal for your body.
get screened, get your mammogram annually.
we did!
Good evening, Bahamas. You're tuned in to NB12 Weekend, broadcasting from Cable 12 Studios on Robinson Road. Coming up tonight in news, calls for bipartisan selection of judges, concerns over the spread of a deadly virus that affects children, why you may not see some of your favorite food items as VAT approaches. Plus, thousands gather on Fort Charlotte to get a taste of the Bahamas. I'm Paige McCartney. We've got those stories and more straight ahead on NB12 Weekend. And welcome once again to NB12. President of the Bahamas Bar Association, Ellsworth Johnson, is calling for more transparency in judicial appointments, which he says should be absent of political influence. Johnson says he's very concerned about the vetting process for judges. Simone Davis reports.
Johnson said he thinks too much responsibility lies within the hands of the Prime Minister in regards to the judicial system. He said he thinks the Bahamas Bar Association should be involved with the selection process of justices.
The Constitution as it stands is in terms of the power that the Prime Minister is given, is nothing more than tyranny wrapped in a bow. Because too much power is in one person's hand. And I'm not just speaking about present, I'm speaking about past. And I'm speaking about where will we go in the future. And if we love the Bahamas with the level of patriotism that we always lament, I think patriotism causes us now to take serious consideration of this whole issue in terms of properly amending or reforming our Constitution as it relates to the powers of the Prime Minister.
Johnson said formal notifications are not sent out when candidates are being considered for the bench. He feels the Bar Association should be notified and have input. He added that the appointments should be free of political influence.
The Prime Minister is responsible for appointing the Chief Justice. Right. He's also responsible for appointing, he plays a part of the process of appointing the other justices, his ministers, his senators, almost every position of significance. And when you look at Endell Thomas and the Queen, a very interesting Privy Council decision that looks at governance and why it is there has to be this political insulation. It says it's so that the country can be stabilized.
Johnson noted that there is very little consultation with the Bahamas Bar Association when it comes to the judicial system, which he said suggests a flawed government.
How it operates in reality, there's very little consultation. We know that. And that has to be dealt with. It's seriously affecting this country.
Reporting for NB12, I'm Simone Davis.
Well, police are investigating two overnight shooting incidents. According to reports, a man was walking along Collins Avenue just after 9 last night when a gunman shot him in the leg before running away. We're told the victim is in stable condition in hospital. And about 3 hours after that incident, police say a man was standing outside a bar on Miami Street when another man shot him in the chest. Police say the gunman then managed to shoot himself in the foot. Both were taken to hospital and are in stable condition, and they're both under a heavy police guard. Well, the Ebola virus has grabbed global attention in recent months, but there's another deadly virus making children across the United States sick. The highly contagious Enterovirus D68 has made its way to this country's closest neighbor to the north, Florida, and has health officials concerned about its possible spread to the Bahamas. Enterovirus D68 affects children and has already caused at least 5 deaths in the United States. The illness also sent dozens of patients to the intensive care unit with partial paralysis, limb weakness, cranial nerve dysfunction, and abnormalities in their spinal gray matter. The most recent death of a 21-month-old in Michigan has grabbed the attention of many in this region.
It's a particular strain of an enterovirus. We know we see enteroviruses that give especially children respiratory issues over the course of every year. So right now, the enterovirus D68 has affected children from as young as 6 weeks to as high as 16 years. So that tends to be the children who are most affected. In addition, for those kids who've actually been screened, what you notice is at least 70 to almost 80% of them actually already have some form of respiratory illness, whether that's asthma or some form of allergy to go with it already. So those children in particular are at risk for worse disease due to this particular strain of the enterovirus.
Chief Medical Officer Dr. Delon Brennan said so far no cases have been detected in the Bahamas. However, he said that doesn't mean health professionals and parents shouldn't remain vigilant given the country's proximity to the U.S. Authorities in the United States say this strain of enterovirus has sent an alarming number of children to hospital with severe respiratory illnesses.
We haven't necessarily seen an upswing in our numbers of fever and respiratory symptoms within our surveillance mechanisms. So for right now, we don't suspect that we have, the particular enterovirus D68 circulating. Because as you can imagine, for a normal cold or kids who have influenza, a lot of times most of those kids will do fine without any problems. But if we're seeing a spike in the numbers of patients presenting, or we see lots of patients, and this is really how they picked it up, is that they were seeing lots of patients who were having respiratory symptoms that were a lot sicker than they expected them to be. Because it was 1 in 7 of their cases were actually going into the ICU for care.
And because Enterovirus 68 affects mainly children, Dr. Brannon says surveillance measures will be taken if officials notice a spike in respiratory problems among children in the Bahamas.
For those children who are having coughing, fever, they have the ability to spread their respiratory droplets. Those children, for the most part, should be kept away from other children who would tend to be suspect of, getting an issue with any respiratory virus, whether that was particularly an enterovirus or any of the other many viruses that are out there. For Enterovirus D68, we do have the ability, again, to screen children, not in country specifically for the strain, but we can, through our regional mechanisms, send it outside of country for it to be to have high-level testing done in order to see if that's what the virus is that is affecting our patients.
Brennan said basic hygiene practices are key to prevention.
The thing that's going to protect you is good hand washing. And I know we preach this as a whole all the time, and people, hear us talk about it and they say, yeah, we've heard that before. But there are at least anywhere between 75 and 90% of infections that are passed from one person to another is really through contact with a surface or someone onto their hands, and that person then self-inoculating, whether through rubbing their eyes, rubbing their nose, touching their food, putting it in their mouth, or touching their mouth. That's really how most, especially respiratory viruses, are passed from one person to another.
Well, as Ebola virus continues to spread across the globe, some Bahamians fear it could eventually spread to the Bahamas. Just last week, the United States recorded its first Ebola-related death, while a nurse in Dallas preliminarily tested positive for Ebola. Deputy Chairman of the Free National Movement and physician Dr. Dwayne Sands says the Bahamas must have an action plan.
In the Bahamas, we have one of the highest seroprevalence rates of HIV. So the lessons that were learned from HIV ought to apply to any new public health threat. That threat should be acknowledged, and then a national policy be developed to ensure that you neither overreact or are ill-prepared to deal with it. Because what you see happening is that the perception that this is a disease in the western part of Africa, that it's only in Guinea or Sierra Leone or Liberia or Nigeria, is turning out not to be the case, because you've had patients in Spain and the United States, and I suspect that they will begin to pop up all over the world.
According to the World Health Organization figures published on Friday, more than 4,000 infected patients have died. Most of those deaths have been recorded in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and New Guinea. Ebola spreads through close contact with an infected person's bodily fluids, such as blood, sweat, vomit, feces, urine, saliva, or semen. Sen says the government should not wait until this country is faced with the disease to launch an educational campaign on the virus.
So as a country, and particularly a country that thrives on tourism, the Bahamas needs to prepare a specific, precise, appropriate action plan that says, this is what we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, and let's be prepared to adjust it when we get additional evidence or information. But that plan ought to be communicated to the Bahamian public so that every single Bahamian has an opportunity to know how we're going to deal with this disease.
And in other news, the president of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employees Confederation and co-chair of the Coalition for Responsible Taxation says consumers may soon notice a shortage of their favorite foods in local grocery stores. Robert Meyer says some retailers and distributors will let their stock run out before value-added tax is implemented in January 2015.
In some cases, shingles will be cheaper in a post-VAT period, because they're removing 20% of the duty, you're only adding 7.5% VAT back. So 5 plus 7.5, 12.5%. They were 25%. So actually, some products are actually going to come down in price, which is healthy, because it's typically directed towards, you know, construction and food and some other goods, aluminum and manufacturing and things like that. So in those cases, they're going to want to run their stocks down in order so that they're competitive when in January 1st, when they have to sell that plus VAT, because otherwise they're double taxed.
But as the holidays approach, Myers is warning businesses against taking advantage of the looming tax by price gouging. In fact, he said raising prices ahead of VAT implementation will only harm businesses.
Anybody that adds VAT on prior to January 1st, because they, you know, are either taking advantage of a situation or they're firing their systems up earlier, is probably, you know, if it's a couple of days, it wouldn't matter. But if they start doing it now, they're going to make themselves price uncompetitive, and people will move. I certainly, in my businesses, would not want to take that risk of being, you know, more expensive today.
The businessman said pricing is critical to keeping businesses and the economy afloat once VAT is introduced at a rate of 7.5% next year. Meyer said with an increase in courier services and online shopping in the Bahamas, local companies now have to compete with the Florida market by keeping their prices low.
If you start to try and price gouge, and by the way, because of our proximity to the US is a competitor. So if we raise our prices to the point where it makes more sense for a consumer to go to Florida and buy a car or buy a plant or buy a whatever, they're going to do that. Because that was our initial concern with VAT at 15%, is that VAT at 15% would force the consumer, because they don't have enough disposable income at the moment. When you start taking, you know, 10 or 11, 12% more out of their disposable income because of VAT, they would be seeking cheaper prices.
And the Chamber introduced the members of its 4-member task force last week. They are Chamber CEO Edison Sumner, Fidelity Bank President Gregory Bethel, ImmediaPest President of the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants Jasmine Davis, and Bahamas Aluminum Manufacturing Chief Andrew Rogers.